Welcome to part 2 of my consultation workshop. In this part, I will talk about the 3 models of decision making. First, let's do a little review of part 1. Like above average drivers, most of us believe we are already above average in consultation skills and attitudes. Consultation is too easily reduced to a slogan, platitude, or mantra. We need only say that we are doing it to be doing it. The dictionary gives us this definition: the search for information, advice, or guidance. From that, we can see that consultation must come from outside of us. This outside is so important. I'm going to digress a little to tell you about my days in school sports. It's a short story. I really was not much of an athlete. I was one of the last boys picked for teams in informal soccer and baseball games. Throughout my elementary and junior high school years, I was on maybe 5 organized teams that had scheduled practices and games. My participation in team sports was rather minimal. In high school, I had a strong need to get out of the house and be with my buddies. High school sports was a good excuse. So, in grade 11, I joined my school's volleyball and basketball teams. This was a rural school, always short of players. That's how I made the team. But I didn't have great skills, so I spent most of that first year on the bench. Only when the basketball score was 60-30 in the last 5 minutes of the game would the coach let me on the floor. But that 5 minutes was so important. I so well remember my first basket in a real basketball game. But here's what is more amazing. After that game, I would replay my entire 5 minutes of playing time in my mind. I would analyze what I did right, what I did wrong, what I would do differently. Then, when I got my 5 minutes on the floor again, I was just a little bit better than last time. The improvement came from my previous on-floor experience, more practice, and the revisualization of the last game. When I moved into grade 12, I had better skills. And the grade 12s of the previous year had graduated, so I got a lot more playing time. And after every game, I would revisualize many parts of that game to figure out what I would do better. Then I went to college. I joined the college's men's volleyball team. I wasn't good enough to be on the first line, but I still got a fair bit of playing time. And after each game, I would revisualize the plays that I made. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? What could I do better? That was my last time in organized sports as a competitive player. While my volleyball skills improved a lot in that year, what I really learned was better skills at revisualization. Later, life found me in many meetings, and I would take those revisualization skills I learned in sports to analyze my performance at those meetings. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? What could I do better? As I gained more experience with meetings, I started asking questions. Why were some meetings more fun than others? Why were some meetings more productive than others? After a lot of pondering, I came up with a decision-making paradigm. Essentially, we have 3 primary mechanisms to affect a group decision. They are power, democratic, and consultative. Here are some traits of a power-dominated meeting. There is one dominant perspective from the person with the power, the ruler. The ruler speaks freely. Others are cautious. The ruler is not obligated to listen. The ruler makes the decision and gives the orders. The ruler is satisfied with the meetings. Others are not. The ruler blames subordinates for mistakes. The democratic model is a little more advanced than the power model. The democratic model allows 2 or 3 perspectives and proposals. A few people dominate the speaking, but there are often rules around their speaking. While more speech is allowed, listening is still not obligated. When the speeches are done, A vote is taken. Decision is made by majority vote. Some people enjoy democracy. It is a game that needs skillful playing. Other people are not comfortable in this game. Bad decisions are minimized. Sometimes advocates are held accountable. Now we are going to advance to the consultative model. Many perspectives and proposals are allowed. Participants are encouraged to speak. Listening is essential, and we will see why later. We let people talk, looking for a consensus to form. There's more satisfaction from a consultative meeting. Ineffective decisions become learning experiences. Ineffective decisions are fixed. In the next slide, I will show how the three models work differently to solve the same problem. For some of you, the last three slides might have moved too fast to absorb all the details of power, democracy, and consultation. To explain differently, I have created the Giant Amoeba to explain the three models. A giant amoeba has invaded our town. It is knocking over cars, breaking down doors, and eating our dogs and cats. 9 people are given the responsibility to figure out how to stop it. Let's assume that the 9 people are in a power organization, and participant number 1 has the power. He has certain insights in the giant amoeba, and he is certain he knows how to stop it. But from our perspective, he can only see the top of the amoeba. Participant number 9 can see much of what number 1 sees, so too for number 2. But person 3 to 8, they see the problem much differently than number 1. They think number 1 is a fool, but he has the power, so they stay quiet. The group tackles the amoeba in the number 1 way. In a democratic decision-making model, participants number 1 and number 3 are the 2 leaders with acceptable proposals. They are competing to get the votes of the other 7 participants. From the diagram, number 1 can kind of see what number 1 is talking about, so number 9 will vote for number 1. And number 4 can kind of see what number 3 is talking about, so that's where that vote goes. Number 2 is the only person who can relate to the proposals of number 1 and number 3. That vote can go either way, but participants 5 through 8 do not understand what number 1 and number 3 are talking about, but they have to vote for number 1 or number 3. Take a look at the black wart on the right. If this wart is not resolved, the group will not come to the right decision. Number 2 and number 3 can see the wart, but number 1 cannot. Rather than admit number 3 might be right, number 1 crafts his rhetoric to convince the others that the wart is only in number 3's imagination. If the group votes for number 1, the wart is not resolved. When we employ democratic decision-making style, we see more of the picture, but we still miss too much. Now, let's move to how a consultative style will tackle the problem. In consultation, everyone in the decision-making group will be encouraged to talk. They might set up a talking round where all 9 participants speak their mind. No one is left out because they do not have enough power or influence to speak. Take a look at the wart on the left. The only person who can see this wart is number 8. But number 8 is not an assertive person. She will not feel comfortable to express her perspective in a power or democratic group. These groups will not resolve the wart of the left side, but with consultation, number 8 is encouraged to speak, feels comfortable to speak, and tells the group about the wart she sees. Now the group has the information to solve the problem. The giant amoeba example assumes that one of the 3 decision-making models dominate the other 2. The real world is not so cut and dry. After revisualization in many meetings, I have concluded that most meetings are a combination of the 3 models. Consider a medieval monarchy as an example. Most of us would like to assume whatever the king says, everyone else does. We would like to put the monarch close to the power apex of this triangle. For many people at the bottom of this society, it certainly seemed like the ruler had a lot of power. But a medieval ruler who ruled with this level of power often did not rule long. Even the best of monarchs needed ministers and courtiers who had specialized knowledge and/or could point out the blind spots the monarchs may have. A coup was likely of the monarch who did not seek outside counsel. So a wise monarch had to allow his immediate subordinates to have some influence in the decisions. So elements of democracy and consultation became part of the decision-making process of a monarchy. Instead of being close to the power apex, the monarchy was probably further away than we would like to believe. Probably somewhere around here. The mix of power, democratic consultation can quickly change. If someone is missing from the meeting or a new person joined, this can shift the kind of discussion the group has. Or maybe the same people are there, but the issue may change the kind of discussion the group has. In this slide, I will give 3 examples of power, democracy, and consultation I have had in my life. The red dot represents my time in my mineral engineering club at the University of Alberta. In my second year, I became quite active in club activities and social events. In my third year, I took on more organizational duties. In my fourth year, I was elected president of the club. I had a certain vision of where I wanted to lead my club, and I would say that I was mostly successful to implement that vision. But not because I was such a brilliant leader. My presidency was mostly based on an informal quid pro quo arrangement between me and the members. I yearned for the position, so I did a lot of volunteer work for the club in my third year. The members rewarded my efforts with my election in the fourth year. The club had executive meetings and general membership meetings. We had motions and votes at these meetings. So that brought some elements of democracy into our decisions. But our consultation was quite low. I was tacitly forceful to control the agenda and the outcome. No one really challenged my rule. I now believe most members acquiesced to my will because if I had quit the presidency, someone else would have had to go do all my work to keep the club active and going. I was playing a good game to earn and keep the presidency. I got the control, they got the fun events. If we look at the red dot, I estimate my presidency was about 60% power, 25% democracy, and 15% consultation. Despite my dictatorial tendencies, the club did present me with this beer mug with my name engraved as a president for the year as token of their appreciation. As you can see, this 43-year-old beer mug has been turned into a holder of pens and pencils. I'm not sure it will hold liquids anymore. About 4 years after I left university, I tried to save Canada by getting into politics. I thought if I got involved in this way, the political process would benefit from my superior intellect. I became an active backroom organizer of my favorite political party. I would have liked to have risen higher, but politics means keeping evenings and weekends available for politics. My business required me to be on 24-hour call and lots of travel. My business came first. While I could not commit to most events, I participated in enough events to gain some influence. I quickly realized my dictator tendencies were not going to work in this party, especially with my limitations of participation. I had to work with the system. I rationalized this surrender so that I would have some influence on the inside and I would have no influence if I were on the outside. I stayed in politics for 6 years. Politics has many rules about who can speak, when they can speak, and for how long. I took some training in Robert's Rules of Order. Because I had this knowledge, I could navigate my facts, opinions, and perspectives through a political meeting much better than those party members who did not get this training. My knowledge of procedures gave me more influence. So my politics was more democratic than my engineering club. And because the rules allowed multiple viewpoints to be presented, we had a little more consultation than my engineering club. But let's not get carried away. Despite our unity to get our party elected, most of us political workers had some kind of personal agenda to implement. I would say acquiring more status, more influence, and more power in the party was a goal many of us strive for. The green dot represents my political workings on my power democratic consultative paradigm. I give this mixture 30% power, 50% democratic, and 20% consultative. Now for my consultative experience. My business was an oilfield service. It specialized in evaluating newly drilled oil and gas wells. I would contract my trucks, equipment, and employees to petroleum companies. To explain this technology briefly, we would send some tools down the well, take some measurements, bring up the tools, and evaluate the measurements. If the numbers were good, the oil company would commit to a bigger investment in the well. If the numbers were poor, the oil company would plug and abandon the well with minimal extra expense. Sometimes the measurements are not clear whether there is sufficient oil or gas to warrant the extra investment. My company tested one well like this. My customer called me into their office to provide the expert's perspective of the data. At this point, the company had spent $250,000 to drill this well. It would cost about $20,000 to plug and abandon the well. The company was legally bound to finish the well with its expense. It would cost another $250,000 to prepare this well for production. The measurements were not clear whether the company could recover this additional investment. The drilling rig was costing $1,000 an hour to wait for our decision. I was in the meeting with 3 petroleum engineers and 2 petroleum geologists. I spoke first about my interpretation of the measurements. Yes, the new well did have some natural gas behind it, but it was not a strong presence. My part was quickly over. I became an observer in the meeting. The company people then broke down the test results into all sorts of facets surrounding the well. They were trying to answer whether they could make a profit on a gas well with a low flow rate and a lot of salt water. They talked and talked. They took this angle and they took that angle. They chopped the decision into little bits and then put it all back together again. The engineers had their calculators out. The geologists were re-looking at their geological maps, readjusting them to the new measurements. The discussion found that the well could be profitable, but the profits would not be great. And this well could also turn out worse than what the test measurements were suggesting. The 5 engineers and geologists decided to plug and abandon the well. What really amazed me with their discussion was how the 5 people seemed to have no personal agenda to this well. They were interested in what was best for the company. As they talked, the right decision came to them. I witnessed a different kind of decision-making style that was beyond my usual experience of power and democracy. This meeting is still one of the best examples of consultation I have had in my life. The yellow dot represents where I placed the gas well meeting in my paradigm. I gave it 4% power, 1% democracy, and 95% consultation. The 4% power came from, I believe, most of us have an internal dictator that is difficult to suppress. The 1% democracy came from how Robert's Rules of Order has affected our psyche. But I really didn't see any power or democracy taking a serious role in this decision. These 3 examples of my life show how the power, democracy, consultative mix can change. Most of us have had experience closer to each of the 3 apexes, and we have had experiences that are more in the middle. I hope this workshop is teaching us how to interpret where we are in this triangle. The previous slide showed how my life has encountered different combinations of power, democracy, and consultation. I was able to construct this paradigm because I liked to re-visualize meetings. If we want to understand the dynamics of our current meetings, we need to place those meetings on the power, democracy, consultative paradigm. The following slides give us some metrics for us to determine where to place our meetings. If we don't do this analysis, then it becomes too easy to assume that we are of a consultative nature, and those who disagree with us are not. In our revisualizations, we could ask ourselves, did we listen to others? Of course we did. We are such great listeners. Sort of like we are already above average drivers and great consultants. So let's turn this question around a little. Were we listened to? All of us have been in situations where our spoken word was only tolerated to prove that we had a chance to speak or present our case. It's a pretty empty feeling, isn't it? If it happened to us, we might be doing the same to others, right? Let's ask, were people cast aside? It's easy to know when we felt cast aside. It's more difficult to recognize when it is happening to others. If some people are not active in the meeting, then we need to ask why. Maybe they got tired of being unlistened to. They have withdrawn and their contributions to the meeting are minimal. There is a price that is paid later when we cast people aside. Were some ideas cast aside? Sometimes we run across ideas we don't like. While we patiently wait for the speaker to stop talking, we hope the idea is not brought up again. It is convenient for us when the meeting moves quickly past these ideas. But think of the person who presented the idea. When ideas and people are cast aside at meetings, even if there is opportunity to speak, this is a sign that consultation might be low. When we revisualize our meetings and see the possible casting aside of people and ideas, we now recognize it for the next time. What would we do different to ensure there is no easy casting aside? How are contrary opinions, facts, and perspectives welcome in our meetings? How are they acknowledged? I was in a meeting where one of the participants went into a little rant, and he was so off base, in outer space, out to lunch. I'm pretty sure others felt the same. While we let this fellow speak his mind, we were hoping to move to the next agenda item sooner than later. When the speaker finally finished, the chair said something amazing. The chair said, "Well, that's an interesting perspective. I never heard that before. I'll have to think about that in the next little while." This little statement acknowledged the speaker and his contribution. It did not judge. It hinted that maybe the rant might be somehow useful. We did move to the next agenda item, and the speaker still participated in the rest of the meeting. A little acknowledgement can keep some people more engaged. How is the contrary stuff utilized? Contrary stuff often provides a basis for a valid objection. If we deal with the objection, we just might find a different and better solution. I have a little warning. Political correctness too often moves the meeting past a contrary situation. We just make it unacceptable to carry the contrariness any further. This technique suppresses the objections that could eventually lead to those better solutions. So when we visualize our meetings, were there any comments that effectively shut down an angle of possible discussion? Preconceived solutions. Our democratic culture encourages us to fight for our ideas and solutions. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But regardless of the decision, we often leave the meeting with the same mindset as when we entered. If we are truly listening to others, then our minds will be changed as we learn more. So, a good sign of consultation is when minds are being changed. We still might not change our mind, but gaining an understanding of why other people are thinking differently is also a good sign of consultation. Finally, if the consensus is not coming our way, can we give consent? Maybe we should just let go. We will soon see how the consensus works out. One thing I have learned about myself is that I can release the group to their inferior decision if I understand some of their rationale. And dealing with my objections also helps my consent. But if I am deflected, I tend to regard that decision as unwise. I then see myself as being on the wrong side of a power or democratic struggle. In other words, I would like you to explain yourself beyond good feelings and hopeful thinking. You might not get my agreement, but you just might get my consent to move forward in your way. What happens when a solution is later found to be ineffective? Do we sweep it under the rug? Continue with the decision as if it was still a good decision? Do we cast blame to the people most responsible? These two outcomes are signs of a power or democratic model. Maybe the underlying goal is to change the influence level of the more powerful people, not fix the problem. Or do we see an ineffective solution as a learning experience? Maybe we should take this approach. We tried something, it didn't work out, we will fix with what we have learned. This is consultation. And another important perspective is if the group is truly in a consultative state, then it did the best with the knowledge, experience, and wisdom it had available to it. Maybe no one should be blamed by using that resource. Remember that consultation comes from outside of ourselves. So in theory, a consultative culture will create solutions that are outside of any one participant. So, were we all contributing to the solution? Did we create a solution better than any individual by him or herself? Maybe a better question is, did I enter the meeting with a possible solution in mind and leave the meeting with something better? How did we implement the solution? Are most of the participants working towards the implementation? That is a good sign of consultation. Are the few disagreeers willingly stepping aside and not degrading the decision? That is also a good sign. And how fun are our meetings? Sometimes I think we are culturally drifting toward more entertainment and away from community as a societal symptom that our meetings are not fun. If we are in a consultative culture, we should be looking forward to our next meeting. We enjoy solving challenges with great people. The last 5 slides gave some signs that help us identify where our group lies on the power democratic consultative paradigm. How we listen, how we handle contrary stuff, how our minds are changed, how ineffective decisions are fixed, how participants are satisfied, will give us a more honest assessment than any slogan, mantra, or platitude could provide. Consultation is hard, thoughtful work, not something anyone can do just because they believe they can do it. And it takes practice. We won't learn the skills and attitudes by this workshop alone or in 1 or 2 meetings. Practice, practice, revisualize. In essence, the 5 previous slides allow us to position our group on the paradigm. How close are we to the consultative apex? How about to the power or democratic apexes? Maybe in the middle. When we know where we are, then we know where to go. In this case, we can see my mineral engineering club and my political party had lots of room for improvement in how they made decisions. If we are not at least 75% consultative, there is room for serious improvement. But if we don't know where we are, then it's too convenient and too easy to believe that we are in a consultative state. This is the end of part 2. We learned there are 3 models of decision making: power, democratic, and consultative. Elements of all 3 models are present in most decisions. We should try to identify the dominant model. We do this by revisualizing our meeting. We look for listening, how contrary stuff is handled, minds being changed, how ineffective decisions are handled, and the satisfaction of the meeting's participants. When we understand where we truly are in the paradigm, then we can move toward more consultation. This will be more effective than saying we are already consultative. Part 3 will be about enhancing our definition of consultation. If you were listening carefully, you might have noticed that Part 2 has already alluded to that definition. So, how well were you listening?